you for Psychedelics today from Breckenridge, Colorado. I think I did that super backwards, but you all get the gist. Joined here today by the hosts of Entheogen. You can find it over at entheogenshow.com. Is that right, guys?
That's right.
Cool. Yeah. And you guys are podcasters. I think I was fascinated years ago when we've been trying to make this happen for ages. I think greater than 2 years, by the way.
Yes, that's right.
So glad we were able to finally do this. And
I think we can blame the pandemic, right?
Yeah, that's true. The pandemic is like a fast forward button. Yeah.
Maybe it's more than 3 years then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really.
So I'm psyched. I was impressed with what you put out ages ago. You've been able to get with some pretty cool folks. And I'm excited to just dig in and chat about your project, who you folks are and backgrounds and what you're trying to do, and maybe even get into some fun speculations or talking shop.
Sweet.
First off, I see the really cool t-shirt. Can I buy that t-shirt at some point?
This was I'm glad you made reference to like 3 years ago, which was when we tried to get this going. It was also when we were in sort of our a heyday of production, and then Joe decided to go on the road in a van for 2 years, and I don't know. There was a pandemic. I decided to have a kid. I don't know. I think life got a lot more complicated, and obviously we are always on different time zones, etc. So things just got complicated. But yeah, when we were still in the heyday, we made good t-shirts.
Yeah, well, they are still available, to answer your question. Entheogenshow.com. It's I have to say, it's a beautiful shirt designed by a friend of mine from Connecticut who also hand prints every shirt, so they're handmade. Each one is a little bit different. It's a beautiful shirt.
I do have to say, once when we made these t-shirts, I was trying to look at the supplier and just, I love to not make decisions about clothing because I just hate clothing. So I was like, could I just buy this same t-shirt without the Entheogen logo on it in 6 different colors, and then there's my wardrobe, Right. But, can't do that.
You just have to buy it with the Entheogen logo. That's just buy buy dozen. We'll give you a discount if you buy a dozen.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, it's also.
It's great to be here, Joe, by the way.
Yeah.
Because you and I are the two Joes from Psychedelic podcasting, with the OG credentials, I guess. And just kudos to you too. You've been putting out some amazing stuff, and it's incredible. You're incredibly prolific too. You guys release shows multiple times per week, I think, at this point. That's awesome. Well done.
Yeah, we've always been sort of in awe because it's just we're just, I don't know, we can never even approach that level of production. Right. And you guys are just on top of it all the time, and you get a constant flow. So nice work.
Yeah. So step one is having a big team, which we got now, thankfully.
Awesome.
And then being multiple thousands of miles away from your family helps too. But hopefully I'm going to address that in the future. Anyway, let's get into it, guys. So where did this idea for the show, did it come from? Were you guys deep in the scene for decades, or maybe let's start with you as individuals. Who wants to jump in first in your origin story?
I think Joe needs to start because he brought me into this. So
I have been in the scene for decades. I will say, I introduced Kevin to his favorite substance, I guess we could say.
Probably most of them.
Many years ago. Maybe several of those substances, entheogens, let's call them. And I actually was looking at some old photos the other day. I was taking photos of some old materials I've just collected over the years as I moved back and forth across the country and all this stuff. And I was looking at this this materials I had from a conference I went to in New York City, May 18th, 2001. It was the Prophets Conference, and I got to see Robert Anton Wilson in person present. I still remember in the flesh, it was so freaking cool. And Stan Groff, Ralph Metzner, just any number of psychedelic.
What year was the Mind States that you flew out to?
Yeah, so the Mind States was also in the early days. I think that was 2003 in Berkeley. Yeah. So
all this was happening. I had no idea what was going on. I was I don't know. Joe's lost his mind. He's just following a bunch of druggies around the country.
So you're friends from a long time ago, and then this kind of happened
school,
later.
Yeah, we're high school friends. Yeah.
And like post high school, well, actually during high school, I remember like the first time I smoked weed, everybody said it wouldn't work the first time, and it worked for me. So I just remember like at the beach with some friends, somebody offered me a bowl and I smoked it. And at first, I didn't know if anything was happening. And then as we were going to leave, my friend was driving. Our friend Nick, Kevin, who also now is a longtime friend of ours, who's in our Burning Man camp and everything. Anyway, so Nick's driving, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I remember like realizing it was really funny that like I couldn't explain to him like how funny it was, and like I was laughing because I couldn't talk to explain like why it was so funny. And it's just like this like loop of like meta humor like going on in my brain. So that was like in the early days.
I think it's working.
Yeah, exactly. Like it worked. I like smoking weed, and I started to meet other people who were smoking weed. Imagine that. And and some of them were like doctors and teachers and like all kinds of professionals. And I was like, I'm like, you guys didn't die. Like you didn't like. You didn't get into a life of crime. Like, wait, hold on a second. People are smoking weed and
going to work
and just having like normal lives,
Right.
So I had this like realization, if we could just like, I didn't think of it in these terms at the time, but like come out of the psychedelic closet, which is kind of more in vogue now, like normalizing it. So, of course, there was the organization Normal back in the day, with the same kind of attitude. But I started a website called ismokeweed.org. This was like around the year 2000, I think. And the idea was the subheading was advertise it, legalize it. So the idea was like, I gave out free bumper stickers that said ismokeweed.org, and you could go to the website and get your own free stickers.
Coincidentally, not a good bumper sticker to have on your car if you get pulled over in South Dakota.
That is correct. Right? I can attest to that. Because apparently it's probable cause. Who knew? But still, I stand by the idea of like, if we could all just normalize this, if we could advertise it, we would be able to legalize it. And 20 years later, like we're kind of on the cusp of that. That's happening. That's playing out now. So
nice work, Joe. I mean, that really. Yeah, you did it, man.
Yeah, the one-man show.
No, but I do remember that era too, and I remember thinking like I was always a little bit slower for these things. It was like a little bit like, well, I'll see what happens to everyone else for like a year, and then I'll see if I jump in there. And I remember Joe kind of being out in the floor. I actually remember like one of the first times I ever ate a pot cookie. I think it was like I was wearing one of Joe's T-shirts. So they said like ismokeweed.org. It's just the worst thing you could be wearing in public. And I remember running into your dad. I'm just like off my face on a cookie with a ismokeweed.org shirt on. I'm just like, I think I just became like the person I was warned about.
Right.
So yeah, no, Joe was always out in front of it, and when you'd go to his house, even in high school, he'd have like his bookshelf would be like all these chemistry books about different substances, etc. And I'm like, do your parents do they know what you have on your bookshelf in here, man? Like, they got to know what's going on.
Yeah. I was there for those kind of early, before it was cool, let's say. And then I went through life and got like a corporate job and then left that job, started my technology consulting company. And I kind of like went against my own, advice really. Like I stopped advertising it. I didn't want like my clients to think like, oh, this guy's like, high. I mean, I wasn't high when I was doing work, but I didn't want them to even think that I was like getting high at night, after work or something. Yeah. Like I just started to feel like it was incompatible with my professionalism.
I'm glad you brought that point up though, because I think that's one of the things, when I first took my now wife to Burning Man, that was, for her, it was like, coming here from Southern Spanish culture, etc. It was like, the first time she was like, oh, there's all these people who are like highly qualified professionals who also like this. And it's not like the scene itself is not decadent in any way. And it's also not interfering in any way. It's actually probably helping whatever they do, in their professional life. Right. So that was really important. I think it was easy to see when you're in high school or, just trying to like avoid problems, right? Or avoid like, and the weed group may not have been like the most attractive, in terms of like what were they actually doing, results, etc., everything else. But as you move on and you start finding groups of people who are, it's like, oh wait, it's not, it's not because of this. It's, I don't know, in spite of or something.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance too, because I mean, I feel like also going back 10 years even, there were worse connotations. I mean, I think like fast forward to today, way more people have had some kind of experience with cannabis, oh, like my friend got back and gave me a gummy, and like you might hear that from like a friend's parent who like had never tried it before. So people who might previously have had really negative associations with anything related to like quote unquote drugs, including cannabis of all things, now I think are much more kind of like open-minded to, all right, this is not going to ruin someone's life necessarily. And that's been changing a lot. And I think it does require all of us to be like pretty regularly, like affirming, that this is something that is part of our life. And it's just something we derive benefit from. If anything, it's not a detriment to our health or life.
Coincidentally, it's amazing how once we started giving people the proper doses of things, everything was fine, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like, who
Yeah.
knew?
Yeah. Can we all just wring our hands about this for a second? Like, the drug war for like 50 years, like one of the worst side effects of it is like, you don't know what you're getting or how much you're taking. I mean, it's horrendous. Like that's the opposite of what you want with any kind of, strong medicine.
Well, it's also like the opposite of the way to solve the problem, like a problem, right? It's like,
clearly,
let's make all of it worse. But the specifically, I think, I don't know, I'm always a stickler about like, when somebody says like, well, I tried, etc., I really didn't like it, I had a bad experience. Like, well, how much did you take? And like, nobody knows, and it's like knowing the dose is like the number. Well, it's like before you try anything is like, how much of it are you taking? And I think weed is the one where it like gets, because it's so sort of harmless. It's like you have a really bad weed experience. Like, what does that mean? You like ate too much and fell asleep, right? So, but still, it's like but there's a much more optimal experience to be had if you just actually take the right amount. And I think that like the gummies and everything have done a really good job at that, because you can I'll take the smallest possible amount, see how that sits, and then maybe if I like that, I'll take 2 of those. And that's just done wonders for not having that
Imagine if we had that with acid and mushrooms.
Yeah,
like it's kind of nice to have a 4 gram or 3.5 gram chocolate bar. You can't really fly with it too easily, but it's kind of, but you don't know the dose, right? Still, to further this point.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I totally agree with you that being my LSD being my favorite substance, I find it highly frustrating all the time. That for me, there's absolutely no situation in which LSD is not appropriate. It just depends how much of it you take.
It's only a question of degree.
Exactly. It's like, what's the dose for this?
Nice. Yeah.
So that's been a big one. And luckily here in Spain, there's an organization, NGO basically, that does analysis for free. You can send anything you want, any substance at all, through the mail.
Is it energy control?
Anonymously. Energy control. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. We talk about them in class a lot. And
oh, really?
It's kind of funny to when we teach, we're like, send it to energy control if you want like the highest level of testing. Yeah. Because
they're great. It's really detailed analysis, etc. They're really fast, and those guys are great. And anytime I've ever had or anybody has a question, I'm like, just send it to energy control. They'll take care of it. And it's amazing, like the variety you get back. I mean, it's like you can get things back where it's like a dose is like 40, 50 micrograms, or it's like once it was like 200. It's just like,
wow,
Jesus.
Like, I got to hang out with Hamilton Morris the other day, and we talked a little bit about LSD, and it's like the number one thing you can guarantee about LSD is the dose on a single square is not 100 micrograms.
Right. Right.
And I threw out the range of like 40 to 250, and he's like, that's about right. Yeah. That's fascinating. And that's terrifying. I was actually just in Maine earlier this week and last week, and we bought a bunch of edibles, and it was all tested and legal, right? The rec store, wildly expensive, 10x Colorado prices for what it's worth.
Wow.
Well, I'm comparing Colorado medical to Maine rec, so it's not a fair apples to apples. But the 9 milligram gummies were like barely working. And
Wow.
and it was really strange. Like 10 to 15 right now is kind of like my go to sleep dose, and I'm like, this isn't working. Do I have to eat like 20 to 30 now? Like, what's going on? And this was, a few people said the same thing about the dosing not being the same.
Okay.
So I think it's number one, an immature market. We'll get there. Like Colorado's been around since 2014 in a rec market. So we'll get there. It's just going to take time. So
I'm so jealous of all you guys, by the way.
Yeah,
I can't explain to you like how jealous of you I was. Like, I actually had I always told people whenever I had talked about LSD or mushrooms or something, people would always like, "Whoa, it's crazy." And I'm like, actually, the only thing that I've ever had a bad, like, I would like legitimately call a bad experience on was eating weed. Like, and I had tried it like 4 or 5 times, and every single time I was like, "Oh, please end. I don't want that." And then the edible, like legal edible scene came around, and a couple, three Burning Mans ago or something, I was like, we just had a really rough time getting there, etc. I was exhausted or something, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, I have this, this edible, etc." And I'm like, every time I've done this, it's been terrible. But you know what? If it's terrible, I can just go to sleep. So, and I need to sleep. So, all right. And I took that. I think it was a 10, and I spent like the next like 10 hours like building camp in the sun. Just like happier than I've ever been in my life. Just like, oh, it's so great to just not have slept for the last 48 hours and build a camp in the middle of the desert in the sun. It's just, I was like, this is a whole new scene, man. I've been missing out.
Yeah.
But here in Spain now, there's a push legally for for medicinal marijuana. I think will be legal very soon nationally, and that's kind of a European trend in general. I think that's gonna. Like that'll get kicked up to the EU at some point, and the EU will make a blanket, like this is the policy direction we want to go in. But they've been what they've been doing in the meantime is Spain has a really interesting way of testing things. Is like they'll kind of let like something will happen, and they'll kind of like, instead of shutting it down, they'll be like, let's see how this plays out. And so what they've been doing is allowing like private associations to open, where you can smoke and purchase, and there's all kinds of products, etc. But they're not legal. So it's just really bizarre. But the cops don't do anything about it, and everybody knows where it is. There's like there was like one in this city like 6 years ago, and I think there's like 35 now. I mean, there's like apps for tourists to know like where to. I mean, it's just it's all out in the open, and like nobody cares. So they're obviously like moving in that direction.
Wow. All right, it's going in the right direction then. That's good.
Yeah. We'll get
I mean, this goes back decades ago. People would just affirm to me like, "You'll never see this in your lifetime," and they sounded like they were probably right, but I was like, I don't want to believe that, and I don't want to accept that, but that was what you heard going back even probably 10, 15 years ago, certainly longer than that. And now here we are. And like, in this country, we have many states where we have this, recreational market operating, legally on a state level, and the federal government here will have to do something about that pretty soon. It seems like, and may very well do that. But yeah, we're seeing it across the country, across the world now. So I think there may not be any turning back, which is really, really exciting. And I mean, I think we're also seeing benefits of it. Like, zooming out to also MDMA therapy and psilocybin. The psychedelics are finally getting like a chance to be put through like a, professional medical therapeutic context.
Weed was always the gateway drug.
The gateway.
It was the gateway. Exactly. It just, paved the way.
Totally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I think that the kind of like public acceptance of marijuana has like sort of there's been like a national relaxing about like, okay, let's try again.
Yeah. Have you guys seen this show? I just started watching it last night.
9 Perfect Strangers.
Yes, and Brad recommended
the first episode.
He couldn't be here today, but yeah, Ashley and I watched like 3 episodes last night, and it's pretty incredible. At first I was a little concerned. I don't know I think this is not like I don't want to give away too much, but there's like a consent issue that comes up in the show. It takes place in the context of a psychedelic therapy clinic, basically, and you're behind the scenes, and from what I know, it's not far from like how some of these places operate, not with the consent issue, but with just like some of the therapeutic models they're using and settings that they're in and things like that. Oftentimes Nicole Kidman is your psychedelic therapist in real life as well. But no, it's an interesting behind the scenes take on this, and it's like it's bringing this to like public view, at least for people on Hulu, I guess, as of now.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be overall pretty good for the movement. I don't know how the season ends, but if they can go through what they're going through in the show with the type of level of drama they're displaying, and then people know that actually in real life this is all like sanctioned and carefully like executed. I think it could only maybe help normalize it even further.
As long as they don't turn into a cult, I think everything will be fine. In terms of the impact of the show. As long as there's no like FBI raid on the facility at the end of the show, we're all right. It's a good thing.
Cults are a spectrum, but it's interesting, right? Like the spoiler alert. I have not watched it, but this idea of psilocybin withdrawals was kind of inappropriate, I thought.
That was the first flag to me. I agree with you. When they said that, I thought that's not accurate. I don't know what that like. That's really not a thing. But
I didn't see that withdrawal. There's a withdrawal scene.
I think it's in like maybe the third episode or something.
What happens when you have psilocybin withdrawal according to this show?
Yeah, I don't remember how they depicted it, but the quote was something like, like psilocybin withdrawals, like you can't, like you couldn't just stop taking it or something, which is really not.
It's actually like the exact opposite, right? It's like every time I've taken mushrooms, I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that again for a really long time.
Yeah, or I mean,
like even though I love the experience and everything else, I'm like that. I like think of the actual like mushroom, and I'm like, woof, no. Like,
yeah, you don't need to for a while to have like a high dose. Microdosing, you can do that indefinitely, or maybe it's good to take a break here and there. I'm not sure what the latest research is on what's the concern with that. It's a like microdosing over.
Do you remember that? It's the this is a big deal, and Amanda Fielding answered it at Horizons a few years ago around overuse. So do you remember this drug fen-phen that a lot of athletes were using?
Yeah.
It was they were using it in super high doses, mushrooms, LSD, way lower doses.
Right.
Something like a 5-HT2A agonist or something. And one of the results was like a thickening or I don't remember offhand, it's been years since I looked at it, of a heart valve. So at a certain point, people's hearts stopped working. And Amanda was like, I've been eating I was for decades eating acid daily, and this didn't happen to me. And we look at the Grateful Dead scene, like we would see that's plenty of people eating acid on a regular basis. That's a big enough cohort to get meaningful data, and it didn't happen. So that's where I land on it.
I made a note here. I just found to myself VHD, I guess, is the concern. I don't even know what that stands for. But symptoms are chest pain, shortness of breath, and lightheadedness. Could also be no physical symptoms, but it relates to the heart, and there's a theoretical it could be some correlation, but I don't think it's ever been shown.
Just valvular heart disease.
Okay,
easy peasy. Yeah. And it's like, the tissues get funky and the heart just stops working appropriately. And like there were athletes dying from this, but they were using a very different substance, and it was highly speculative, right? But it's like, the people being careful in the room were saying, hey, like before we kind of universalize microdosing, maybe we should clear this question up. Sure, and others were more like, we have no data, so why, and we have no, actual reason to be concerned. Right. So why would we be? So it's kind of an interesting conversation for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really good that our industry here can be like extra careful, I think like MAPS has shown this for 35 years now, just plodding along carefully and being really careful not to like lose any ground that we've gained, and not to make any missteps or even like I feel like they could be screaming from the rooftops about the kind of results they've been showing in some of these studies. It's unbelievable, but they kind of undersell it, and I think that's probably the right way to go, because there is a chance that we say, oh, actually there's this little minor issue that we need to talk about and address. Let's not like, wholeheartedly recommend this until we get to that point where it has, full approval.
Also, I think that you have this tremendous media responsibility to like not be, to not sort of like cause any great social problems. It's like if the president can go on TV and tell people like Clorox is a good thing to drink, and then like people show up in emergency rooms, right. It's like maybe just be careful about. Just be very muted and careful and very stick to the science, show the results, etc. But I think you have to be very careful about going way over the top, right?
Yeah.
Like, where was the FDA on that one?
But microdosing bleach as a prophylactic against COVID, that could be. No.
That's fascinating. Like, if you did micrograms of bleach,
right.
Clearly minimal to zero physiological effect. Like, that's a different angle, right?
And like if somebody was
deep in that cult of Trump, like they might just believe it, and like the
placebo effect
could kick in.
There's no such thing as like parody anymore.
Hormesis? What's that called? Like hormesis? It's like taking small doses of incrementally larger doses of poison so that you'll be
from like the Princess Bride. Yeah,
exactly. Like that type of exactly. So that'll get you to the moment where you can take the full dose of Clorox and survive.
Good Lord, don't do it. Nobody do that.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. That's what MAPS could do. They could say like, "Hey, we had these results. Nobody do this." Right? Like that's the disclaimer at the end.
So it's a fascinating movement we're all part of here. And Joe, it's cool you got in so early. Like that's when I started my undergrad was 2001. I started reading Groff right around there. And it was really fucking amazing. And then I assume you were listening to Lorenzo Haggerty's Psychedelic Salon around the time it came out. Yeah. Because that's how you got access. You didn't have to fly to Mexico for the conference. You still got to listen or something.
Okay. I remember his name and I remember his audio. I wish I could think of the other. There's another guy who's been doing it for a really long time who actually has a radio show. That is now a podcast. You know the guy I'm talking about, Robert?
Yes. What's his?
Wish I could think of it.
That was for me. It was like a classic. I used to listen to that all the time. It was like a local radio show, and I always wondered like who gave the thumbs up on this. What station is this in what place of the country that like was okay with this?
Mind Body Health, I think is the name
Mind Body Health exactly.
And Politics, I think is the name of his podcast. I'm just searching for him now. Yeah. Maybe
it was the only content. It was the only seriously distributed content, right?
But yeah, I mean, going way back, it was just a different world. I mean, there was an explosion in podcasting in general in the last maybe few years. My original experience with podcasting was through an Apple consulting show that I started in 2013, I guess. So that's and even back then it was a geeky thing. People in tech were interested in podcasts because they knew how to like find this stuff on their devices. But really it wasn't. Most of the general public didn't know about podcasting until much later. Back in the day, you'd go to a website and you would like download a Terrence McKenna MP3 or something. That was the extent of like getting audio content in this field. Way back when.
Yeah, I definitely had an iPod full of like, Timothy Leary and Terrence McKenna bits, right? Like,
people don't get enough of that in their diets these days. We understand that Terrence was highly inaccurate on occasion.
That's fine.
And it was more poetic and interesting.
Right?
Romantic
the artist,
scene. And then like Leary. You just had to be careful. Like it was largely awesome. Like everything he like had in writing or in audio was amazing, largely. And
well, you can see like why he gathered such a following too, right? He's sort of like an orator, right? Like
wildly charismatic.
I think about that sometimes though too. It's like with Leary, I mean, would we have done better without a Timothy Leary figure, at his time? Or did we need to go through this sort of like cultural explosion of psychedelics into the scene? Kind of this like, because I mean, they're going to be discovered at some point, can it stay underground? I mean, do we just need to like go full speed ahead into just like saturation into culture, and like letting that then like kind of burn out also, and then we have this lull for unfortunately many decades. Maybe we didn't need to have as many repercussions. I wish that could have been mitigated, but would we have done better without Timothy Leary like doing his thing?
That's the Michael Pollan question, right? That's like that's the big question Michael Pollan raises, right? It depends how long the timeline is, right?
Like, because we say it's the Timothy Leary thing, but it was really the Richard Nixon thing helping him get even more famous.
Yeah,
because the hippie movement was quite fringe, right? Like, how do you guys see that?
That's an interesting point. I mean, if they didn't sort of like persecute him to the extent that they did, and vilify him, and then like create this controversy around him. I mean, what would the negative effects have been? Like maybe people take a little too much in the wrong setting and like then dial it back. And I mean, it's just like culture would kind of like calibrate for that, but I think to your point, it is the Nixon effect. It's like it's the sort of like outsized response that from like the top down government that that caused like the actual ill effects, which is like cutting off all research. I mean, the problem was when they said no medical value, like that wasn't true at that time. And it certainly, hasn't been true ever since then. And like, it's taken this long to unwind that.
There is something about like the psychedelic revolution 2.0. It seems like one of its features is that everybody avoids the guru figure. Right? It's like the guru figure has been like vilified and is sort of like deemed either unnecessary, right, at best, or at worst, like to be avoided, deeply avoided. And I think it's something that a lot of people. It's something, for example, when we had our first interactions with Alex Gray, like way back in the day, it was something I really appreciated about him was that he wasn't a guru, and he wasn't trying to. Like, he had a million interesting things to say. Everyone wanted to hear what he had to say, but he was trying like his best all the time not to create. He didn't want like a cult, basically. Right.
That's the first thing. The very first exchange I had with him when I met him at a party on a. At an unseaworthy ship docked off of the coast of Manhattan way back when early 2000s. I mean, he's like a hero of mine already, and I was at this event and he was signing some stuff, and I went in and I gave him an ismokeweed.org t-shirt, and I said, you're like a hero of mine. Thank you so much for all your amazing visionary art. It's incredible. I can't believe how profound it is. And, he said, oh, well, thank you. I'm just the grunt, that's what he said to me. Like, I'm just the physical, like body, just like doing some work, like he didn't want to take any credit for it, And I think that's, to your point, really the right approach to like, I mean, anybody who's seeking power and authority and like, guruship is sort of like, I mean, clearly, like, probably has like the wrong alignment of incentives and things.
Well, it's just bound for you're bound for disappointment at some point, or disaster at worst, or you open the door to like psychopathic personalities who seek like that avenue to gain power, etc. So I think that like that's been, to me, one of the more impressive features of this new revolution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you guys think like? Do you think that this like guru kind of like relationship sort of model is like inherently fraught? I mean, so this was coming up, Kevin, like in the context of our Burning Man camp, right? So we have the general, okay, the guy who leads the camp, right? And he's not a guru at all,
No.
But like he has like incredible respect from everyone in the camp. And and I think that like he through like his efforts, which are very visible, although like not glorified, by him in any way. He's just sort of like a hard worker,
zero PR. He has no PR department.
But incredibly hardworking, like incredible work ethic. Amazing human, and his output is just visible throughout the camp, and it inspires everyone. I mean, he's a catalyst to like inspiring other people in the camp to put in as much effort as they can, because they'll never match his effort. But like we all try to just like
but that's the leadership by example, right?
Right.
Like the
So it's
leadership by example
yeah,
is a very interesting model, and I think Alex Gray follows a similar thing. It's like, well, I just do
totally.
my thing, and it's awesome, and everybody lines up to see it.
And recently I had a conversation with our camp leader, and he used this term, and I've heard this term at Cosm, speaking of Alex Gray. It's a duocracy.
Yeah.
It's like basically like you have as much sort of like power and authority as you do. Like it's proportional to what you do for others. And I think that model works like very reciprocally, because people see it and they realize that like in order to like achieve better standing, let's say, in this like format of a organizing of a community, they have to do more. So everybody's always trying to do things for each other, like preempting needs, observing something that somebody needs even before they know they need it, and providing it, helping them out. There's like a level of grace in that I think is really beautiful, and just taking care of each other in community. So this goes back to the whole guru question, because I think there's sort of like a model to organize society around, where like if we had a benevolent dictator, this would work really, really well, like.
Of course.
Would that person be inherently...
That's the famous saying, right? Like, I mean, like the dictatorship, the best form of government is a dictatorship with a good dictator. It's just very hard it seems very hard to find them.
We just need to find a perfect human.
It seems like the people who want to be dictators don't exactly, follow that,
right.
They don't exactly have the profiles we're looking for.
Because we're filtering for like the wrong criteria when we select our leaders. It's like the people, they're self-selecting, like the people like that seek power and authority for like those wrong reasons. They're the ones who like get to the head of the pack basically, and like the people are quietly just toiling away.
Sometimes it works out.
Once
in a while, but yeah, no, I think that like on his in his book Waking Up, Sam Harris mentions this like problem with gurus, particularly in Asia, and in sort of all of his time, like going to in his early 20s, like going to these long retreats, etc. It's just like, even these, he makes a very good point. He's like, someone can be an absolutely amazing human being at something and still also be a terrible human being in another aspect. So you can have this person who's just like an eminence of, a certain particular school of meditation, etc. But they can also, be, lascivious with their young female students. It's just like they're not mutually exclusive. So yeah, I think the lack of a guru is a good thing. I think certainly it doesn't mean there's a lack of leadership. It just means there's a lack of like this cult like sort of loyalty too. I mean, I think for me, one of the stark like features of the Trump administration, particularly, was the loyalty question, right? I mean, it's like this. It's like almost like mafia level loyalty
exactly.
question. And then like, obviously you have to be loyal to the leader, but like the second the leader like sees an opportunity to like throw you under the bus for his own good, I mean, you're gone. I mean, your loyalty is a one-way street,
right? Exactly.
So yeah.
The cult thing is fascinating, and yeah, loyalty, it's such a big deal. Quick tangent before I jump back to my answer.
Sure.
I was watching Veep last night, and outrageous show, and the whole thing was around like loyalty in her circle, and like who called me a C-word, and she put somebody in charge of the investigation. It turned out everybody did, and at the end of the episode, like she's like losing it. Like, who did it? Was it everybody? Yeah. Okay, get out of here. Fine.
You're like, all fired.
Yeah. So there was like this weird loyalty. She was trying to fire everybody else, but it was like everybody in the team. She's like, all right, I can't lose all of you, so whatever. If it was one or two, fine. But the cult thing in like it was important. Like they had these classical schools. If you look at the evolution of Buddhism, like they had these classical schools, and they had like abbots, and you had to like earn your way into those roles, and some were cool, some weren't that cool. In the Zen traditions, people got their ass kicked, like physically beat regularly, and that was part of the lesson, was to get your ass kicked. Like I don't understand it totally. I've read some about Zen, but it's so there's a long-standing tradition, and it was helpful for many. I don't have a breakdown on how many it was helpful for and how many it wasn't. So it's really a difficult answer. In this day and age, if somebody wants to go for it, as long as they go in with eyes open, I think it's okay. But you have to have your eyes open before you start agreeing to this weird relationship. Do Do you know Matt
Sure.
Remski? Who?
No.
He runs a show called Conspirituality. He actually got sucked into a number of cults. We did a podcast with him ages ago. I'm trying to find his book. Conspirituality, he like discusses a lot of the Q material and how that all operates. But he eventually had to get a master's degree to figure out what the hell was happening and why he kept getting sucked into cults. And so we did a podcast on that ages ago, and because there's so much cult activity in this space right now, it's not pretty.
That's
but
it's unfortunate that psychedelics like have been sort of like a certain segment of the community has been like pulled into like heavy conspiracy and heavy cult activity, right?
I get that stuff on Twitter. Like, so we have our Entheogen show, Twitter account. And I have a few others. I have like my own personal one. I have one from other podcasts, my company. And I never see any like those other ones match my sort of like, selection bias like pretty well. Like the stuff that I want to see is typically things that I understand why it thinks I want to see those things, even if I also like to see the opposite sometimes. I see a lot of the opposite on the Entheogen Twitter, like conspiratorial stuff. And I mean, this is well established that, like in the whole, new age sort of like movement, and just like, that's been co-opted for a while, and it's not surprising. I mean, I think that like there's we overlap with a significant area where people have like are prone to magical thinking and just like the ideas of things being like really alluring and stuff without necessarily like a compass to help them determine how accurate something is or how to evaluate incoming information very clearly. And so like I think it's a perfect, our kind of market is perfect. It's ripe for that kind of like preying on by these outside forces that I think are doing it. I mean, I think, I don't know if this is like established, but it seems like probably a misinformation campaign that's clearly like targeting.
That has been established already. I mean, there's been like massive money behind, trying to tip certain percentages of different communities over towards specifically like against, big vaccine, et cetera. Yeah. I mean, like there's been a pretty serious campaign.
It's like Moneyball meets social media in politics. It's like a weird scene. Right. Yeah, like the conspiracy thing, like there are conspiracies, but a lot of them are also bullshit. The theories are often bullshit.
Also, like when we were kids, there were like 3 conspiracy theories, and then now there's a conspiracy theory like every 5 minutes, and like
it's just a photo of Bill Maher with red shoes on earlier on Instagram. Therefore, he's wearing red shoes. Therefore, he's a cannibal. I'm like, a good lord, like
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole like satanic child molestation conspiracy theory, that's a pretty unbelievable one. And that those people, I find it unbelievable because out of curiosity, I'll just like follow those things all the time. Like, just like what have you seen that has like really tipped you? And there never seems to be any evidence. It's just like, and then there's like these ridiculous claims all the time. And it's like, really? I mean, this is what pushed you over the line to believing this,
This is what did it.
right. The red shoes. I was fooled until then, then I knew.
Or well, I mean, Justin Bieber, winked during this one part of a video like that. He knows,
right?
He's in on it.
There's this whole like in-group, out-group thing, and do your own research. Like the more obscure the website is, like the more of a weird corner of the internet you can find, like somehow ironically, paradoxically, like the more you believe that somehow, I mean, I get questioning authority. Speaking of Timothy Leary, think for yourself, question authority. Good advice. Question authority. It doesn't mean reject authority. Skepticism is not the same thing as contrarianism. Like, like those are 2 totally different things. Like you can be skeptical, and a true skeptic would look into information and then like evaluate it and not necessarily just reject institutions. We have institutions for a reason. Sam Harris recently, speaking of Sam Harris's amazing podcast, he said something about like, imagine if we like got like airplane parts from eBay. Like, we need like an authority who manufactures and like tests these, and like we need an institution to provide airplane parts. Like this is why we have institutions that create vaccines and do things like that. We don't just like make them in somebody's basement and then say like this is the good stuff. The other stuff is made by an institution.
That's how we make LSD.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, yeah,
someone's
Adreno LSD.
Yeah. Well, speaking of adrenochrome, the whole like, I mean, I don't know what the conspiracy is. It's like an insane, fever dream. But Arrowhead had to put out an FAQ on adrenochrome. And the question is, I read that adrenochrome is harvested from fearful children after killing them. Do you know anything about that? And you could just tell the tone that this, whoever responded, I think Earth replied, to this, and it's just like, this is ridiculous. And like, but like, if I have to explain this to you, like adrenochrome is like a metabolite of epinephrine, like, and basically none of these, it's not difficult to make. Like no one would like harvest it from children if this was even.
It's oxidized adrenaline largely. And it's nothing like you recall in, Fear and Loathing, they had a scene about adrenochrome, right? And that was kind of like Hunter kind of trolling the scene a little bit.
He made the whole.
Did you read Mike J's Mescaline?
No.
Where he kind of like references that, and he's like, "There's no real evidence that it like has ever been used, or even does anything fun." Why not just get an EpiPen if you want some extra adrenaline? It's probably cheaper than killing kids.
Is that fun anyway? It's like, it's weird.
Not really.
I was gonna say like what if there are two ways to do something, and one of them is like harvesting children, there, it's like the reward must be pretty high, if you choose that route. It's like,
right. The secret ingredient is crime, I guess.
Right. That's what makes it work. It has to be adrenochrome harvested in that way. Then it's got that extra spin.
Maynard James Keenan was interviewed recently about he was talking about this topic, and I thought it was pretty good. He made some pretty good points about that, about how like that we've kind of confused the idea of freedom. It's like freedom doesn't mean like you do anything you want. Like freedom means you have like the freedom to pursue a lifestyle and to have any idea you want, and et cetera. It doesn't mean you just choose every single thing in the society. It has to be your way, and it's sort of like there's a confusion between freedom and like narcissism.
That's what Stalin did. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. But what's the saying? It's like my freedom ends where like your freedom begins, or something like that. I mean, like I don't have the freedom to just like punch somebody, like I mean, I don't feel restricted in any way not being able to do that either, I still feel free.
A friend of mine sent me the other day.
Well, right.
A friend of mine sent me the other day. We were joking about how about like the sort of the vaccine situation, et cetera. And it's like, well, imagine because it's looking for other metaphors of things in society. Seat belts came up. It was like, oh, imagine if people were like making up all this stuff about seat belts. And he actually sent us a video from like the campaign to stop the law to make seat belts obligatory. And I mean, It's hilariously similar, like mind blowing, like seatbelts. Like,
yeah. It's a really
still waiting for the science to come in.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's a perfect metaphor. I mean, but clearly people don't understand like even why we have seatbelts, let alone or seatbelt laws, let alone why, how a vaccine works, and like why it's important, or let alone masks. I mean, yeah. It's kind of insulting when somebody's like, it's my freedom not to wear a mask. Like that's offensive to me. And like they don't realize that, you know what I mean? If they don't want to, I get it. Nobody wants to wear a mask, but like we're just cooperating. Exactly. Like we're in a society.
I heard somebody say something that's like, in other generations, they're like called on to like, get on boats and go out to like the Pacific Ocean and like fight the Japanese. And it's like all we had to do was put on a mask. We couldn't do it.
Yeah,
we just couldn't do it.
Do that.
We couldn't get over it. It's the only thing they asked us to do. It's literally the only contribution we had to make to society was just put a mask on when we went into a store. Like that was it.
So I'm kind of curious about your show, and if we want to so you mentioned Alex Gray. Alex Gray has been on your show, is that right?
Yeah, a couple times. We interviewed Alex and Allison and Rick Doblin at Burning Man, which was kind of difficult to like orchestrate and bring together. But it was amazing to bring them together because they started their organizations at like a similar time, and they, and it's. I mean, I think it's just hard. You imagine all these people are friends on the phone all the time, but actually in practice they're just as busy as we are, and they probably rarely see each other and catch up. And they were just in an RV together, chatting, and it was really fun just to kind of be there for that and just to put that together. The only thing that sucked is like recording at Burning Man in an RV with like 10 people in this tiny space and an air conditioning unit like right here, and the mic is like right, mics are here. It just was impossible. But it was fun to do anyway. But yeah, Alex and Allison are good friends of mine, and I've been involved with COSM, their organization, the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, for quite a while now as well. So
yeah,
good people.
That's great. And who else have you had on, or what's the trajectory and like overarching thesis maybe of the project?
Well, so that's a good question too, because where it started was at Burning Man. The idea for it. So we attended a talk, and it was like this intellectual discussion about like the archetypes in like visionary experiences like ayahuasca experiences and things like that. And I just remember Brad being really inspired and saying like let's do something. Like, this is great that these people are doing things like, sort of like with like professionally in this field. Like, what are we going to do? Let's do something.
But we were also like, we were sitting around that day having like a long conversation in the kitchen of our like camp at Burning Man, like we would do all the time. And somebody walked by and said something about like, why don't you guys just start a podcast?
Yeah.
Like
is that right?
The joke was like, you guys are always,
because we're chatting about
anyway,
all the time anyway.
This.
Yeah. And I had this, a little bit of podcast experience already. So we kind of dove in like, a couple months after Burning Man and just started recording, and we arranged, through like, I mean, you probably know how it goes, Joe. There's like a lot of organic sort of growth through connections you make, so we had a connection. I forget who's like some of our early
Carl Ruck was our first episode.
Whoa.
Oh,
Professor Carl Ruck, who was a professor of mine in college,
really
was way over my head at the point I had him as a professor. And it was years later that I was like, oh man, that Ruck was the man, and I just like started going back and like reading all his stuff, whatever. And then I sent him, and I still had his email address on a syllabus, like a copy, an old copy. And I like grabbed his BU email address and like sent him an email. And I'm like, hey, I was a student of yours like 20 years ago in a lecture hall of like 500 people. You don't have no idea who I am, etc. But like everything you said then has begun to make sense over like a very long period of time. And actually, we named the show Entheogen because of him. Like he used that word.
He coined that term originally. I think
he coined that term, and I had it was the word I had remembered from that course when we were talking about a name. It's like, oh well, let's change. If we're going to change the conversation, let's change the actual word too, and use something a little bit more with less baggage, etc. But he agreed. He was like 80 years old at the point. He said like, yeah, no problem. Like, and we sent him his link, and had a great conversation with him in it. So I think it just kicked things off very well. It gave us a good feel that there were people who wanted to talk. There were certainly like the audience grew very quickly. So we thought like, well, this is a thing. Like people want to hear about this, and certainly none of the three of us are in the field in terms of like we have no training in this field, etc. We just have our experience and our own reading, etc. The sort of autodidactic learning. So I think we chose to go in with an angle that was more like we'll present pieces of information, etc. But we're not professionals, and we want to be sort of like infotainment of sorts, you know what I mean? Well, I'll like plug in and have a listen to a good a good conversation with content, but that's entertaining as well. So
yeah, and I think we also early on established kind of like reaching into as many areas of the work as possible, and the four kind of things we came up with were therapeutic, medicinal, sacramental, and recreational contexts. Exploring these substances in those four contexts, and I think there's obviously some overlap, and it's a question of like terminology. But not like excluding the recreational. I mean, certainly we've all had some really great recreational times. It's not just about like let's pretend that it's just this therapeutic thing or just medicinal and talk about it in this stodgy kind of like.
Well, that was the weed strategy, right? Like let's just talk about the medicinal, and then when nobody's looking,
that's the gateway. Yeah, exactly. But I think at this point, I mean, as one of our early guests, also Julie Holland pointed out, recreational is therapeutic. There's a real benefit to the recreational side of things too. So we wanted to make sure we covered that also.
Was it Julie who also used that term that stuck with me, the betterment of well people?
She may have brought it up. That's an old term that goes back to I forget, one of those guys from the tech industry way back when.
Okay. Bob Jesse, I think, uses it a lot. He's kind of one of the OGs on that term. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I bet there's others too. Back from
it just, I mean,
Palo Alto and stuff.
The betterment. It sounds like it was written in the 1600s or something. It's like part of the Constitutional Congress.
Even referring to like well people.
Exactly.
Well people.
And this is kind of like what the scene looked like in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, right? People wanted an interdisciplinary look at this. Like at the same time, you're interested in chemistry, you're interested in the history of religion and ancient practices, right? It's neuroscience and Jungian psychology. It's a really interesting intersection point, and psychedelics kind of opens that up, right?
Totally. I mean, it's also like psychedelics are a tool for exploring a lot of those things. And then we also have tools in all those fields that we can use to analyze psychedelics. And these things like are synergistic. They work together. You can like Robin Carhart Harris, who you've interviewed on your show.
By the way, nice job.
That's like, an awesome guest.
That's like the
he's like our hero.
Crown jewel,
Yeah. He did the brain imaging studies and things. And so putting someone in an fMRI machine, like while they're having that experience, now we get new information about what's happening and how it works, which not only tells us like how psychedelics work, but maybe something more about neuroscience. And so, I mean, I think it's like everything being multidisciplinary, which is, I think, why MAPS has just a great name from 35 years ago. It like psychedelics are the most multidisciplinary thing there is practically. Yeah. They kind of like feed in and out of every area there. So it's been an interesting ride. Unfortunately we fell off the podcasting bandwagon.
I think it was a cliff. I think it was a very high cliff that we fell off for quite a while there. We just sort of got back. It's
awesome.
Like round two after a long layoff. So it's been really fun too.
New shows. Yeah.
Yeah, we have some new shows coming out, et cetera. And I'm sure you guys have the same feeling too, where it's like apart from what you're doing, it's like the conversation itself that you're having, and the kind of the friendship space of the podcast is something that when you don't have it, you miss it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really nice to have this. I couldn't really imagine my life without the opportunity to speak to folks on a regular basis who are up to interesting stuff. And so I have a question about what I saw as maybe your most recent podcast on the site. You were quoted. This is actually an interesting juxtaposition. So Playboy quoted you in an article.
Yes, actually written by your very own. Written by your very own Michelle Janikian, who's been a co-host on your show as well, right? Yeah,
editor in chief. She just left recently, but on great terms. So it's really cool that she was able to pull that off. But how does that look, getting published in Playboy about toxic masculinity? That's the juxtaposition.
I mean, is there any answer to that question? I think the question itself is just perfect. It's just perfectly formulated.
I mean, like speaking 100% sincerely, but there's something, I don't know what it is, but there's something really, it's like, you were going to be in Playboy. How cool is that? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why, but it's just because it's an institution, it's like forget about like the content of the article and everything else. It's like, so yeah, it goes back to that juxtaposition. It's like, it's this institution sort of in an old hierarchy somewhere. It's it's kind of hard to place nowadays. What is Playboy doing these days? It's like, it's gotta be a tough sell these days.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, era of, everything right now,
Yeah,
publishing
absolutely.
and all of that. But I mean, when Michelle reached out to us, we're thinking like us, like, what do we have to say about like this topic to Playboy in the context of psychedelics? I mean, that was specifically, I think, what the,
yeah.
sort of why we were brought in. But, I think it's an important topic also, and maybe what better publication to do some work in exploring that.
Yeah, when people were, so certain people were joking, like making fun of us about being in Playboy, I was like, go back and read some Playboy interview. I mean, like Playboy's had some
Yeah.
unbelievable interviews over the years, and I remember, I don't know, there are several iconic interviews that were done there, et cetera. So it's always had that space too for like serious, topics as well, right?
Yeah, like serious libertarian magazine for a while, Robert Anton Wilson as their editor-in-chief, discussing things like Timothy Leary, LSD, etc. So how amazing is that? And we have Playboy to thank, I believe, for the Illuminatus trilogy and many other Robert Anton Wilson books. So
Interesting.
at the very least, thankful for that lineage.
Yeah. I mean, I guess at that point, what Playboy was doing, like their, the photography, et cetera. I mean, that was all so avant-garde, right, and sort of rebellious that they could also get away with expressing any sort of opinion. I mean, it was a safe space for that, right?
Right. That's a really interesting framing. Yeah. And just kind of curious what you were saying about what was your like statement on toxic masculinity at the time? 3 white guys to the internet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we joked a little bit about that too, but I think our general thing was, I don't like to ascribe any magical powers to psychedelics. I think they do have their own magical powers, but I don't think they're not like an end all solution for anything. So we did discuss all of these potential areas in which toxic masculinity sort of can be mitigated by psychedelics, but not that it's like take this toxic masculinity pill and you'll be fine tomorrow kind of thing. It's just more about the process each person kind of undergoes and sort of how in a personal evolution, like if you were of that mindset, like it's something you'd probably find loosening over time. I think our take too was that the 3 of us were particularly not toxically masculine guys ever, and I think that's part of that was the basis of our in part of our friendship, etc. It's one of the things we discussed was when we went to Burning Man, or at least for me, one of the things I found like really comforting about Burning Man when I first went was the lack of like any sort of broy masculine, super masculine culture. I mean, there is masculinity, but it's just not it's not toxic, or it's not degrading in any way.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting that psychedelics have like positive benefits in all these kind of like seemingly random areas. Like, why would they help us like not have, not be like the worst version of ourselves? Why would they help us appreciate, like the environment, nature, things like that. And I mean, and like, also there's this thing where it's like, those are not even good questions to ask. Like psychedelics should be integrated with like our lives. There's maybe humans have had for, many years, symbiotic relationships with plant teachers and medicines and things like that. And for, 50 plus years, like we were like cut off from that, or, I mean, and culturally at various points in human evolution, I think we've been cut off, or different cultures have been cut off, but specifically in this country, we like boosted and amplified culture, and like politics and power, and then like just removed psychedelics, from the mainstream. So it may also be like the lack of psychedelics, the severing of that relationship with these compounds, that resulted in a lot of these problems, like where we just suddenly thought like, let's just abuse nature for a while, like, and see what happens.
There are also problems of the ego too, don't you think? I mean, it's like when it's sort of like an ego sickness to be, like, I don't know, mistreating people on the grounds of, your own masculinity. It's just like a completely so if you're experimenting with psychedelics, et cetera, and you're having sort of this like encounters with your ego or the lack thereof at certain times, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to shatter any kind of like, this is kind of like pretty surface, maladies. So they just sort of, fade away pretty quickly.
Yeah,
it's the same thing we've talked about with nature, right? It's like, well, how do you take mushrooms and walk in the woods for an hour, and you're like, Jesus Christ, this is the most beautiful place in the world. You know what I mean? Like, why would we destroy this?
Right.
Like, why would we hurt like make less of this? You know what I mean? So
do you think like the ego gets out of control, like on a daily basis without that, where, you think to yourself, I'm the most beautiful thing in the world? Like the ego kind of has this like self-centered, obviously like, attitude. And so like we're blind to like the other important things in the world. And with psychedelics, we just, destroy the ego deliberately in some cases, like through those experiences. And therefore you experience like what things would be like to appreciate without your ego like overriding everything.
It's like, what is toxic masculinity in the end? It's like it's like collective narcissism, right? It's sort of like it's like being really tribalistically narcissistic about certain qualities of your group as being dominant in some way, or so. I mean, so it's like it's obviously like surface ego stuff that just break that open on day one with a psychedelic, right?
But then there's also the fact of like ego amplification with psychedelics, like going back to the guru question, so I think that's really interesting to think about. There's always this like shadow or like sort of like flip side of things. But I think en masse, psychedelics, typically tend to keep the ego in check for most people. Maybe for a few, it amplifies things, but
there's got to be some certain small percentage. And I think when we talked to Michelle that day, I think I brought up that that quote about, if you give LSD to Richard Alpert, you get Ram Dass, but if you give it to Timothy Leary, you get Timothy Leary. Sorry, you get Charles Manson, you get Charles Manson.
I thought that's where you were going.
Sorry, went off track there, but I mean that's that's the case, right? I mean there's always some percentage of people, so that's why I think it's important to not think of.
And there are Nazis using psychedelics. There are alt-right folks like Q Shaman, etc. Like, there's a lot going on, right? Here, and it makes you more of what you are. If we don't have the right container and doing the right kinds of work, like, you've probably seen some incredibly weird things at Burning Man. Well, of course, you probably should have, like, as soon as you get there, right? But like in terms of behavior change and shifting, like there's got to be some really strange things going on. Yeah,
we've had in the past a yearly tradition, and so having that sort of a group experience, et cetera. I mean, it's interesting to see how those things play out over a couple of days. And, there's certainly always a handful of people that have, quite newly powerful experiences. Absolutely. But yeah, getting back to that point, I mean, it can't be seen as a panacea, right? And it can't be seen. I think the other point about psychedelic revolution 2.0 is that it's not just the substance. It has to be accompanied by therapy, some sort of group experience that allows an integration or a sort of digestion of the experience, right?
That's a really important point, I think. I mean, it's not, in this culture, we want a thing we can just take a pill, and that's, and maybe sometimes it works. If you have a headache, you could just take a pill. You don't need to also like do therapy or something
about it.
Right. But like it's important to point out what you just said. I think that the benefits that we're seeing through a lot of the MAP studies and other sponsored studies, which are having such positive results, it is a totally different model, really. It's a combination of, the psychedelic, the substance, the medicine with the talk therapy and other kind of, the safe container, like you pointed out, is really important as well. I mean, it goes back to the 60s, like drug set and setting was the thing there. So having the right drug and the right dosage, which to your point earlier, Joe, is like kind of difficult step one these days to even know what you're taking and how much of it. That's really, really important. Your mindset is kind of key, like having the right attitude and approach going in, and the setting, the safe container. I mean, it's amazing that kind of like formulation still holds up as really important. And I mean, what other practices, medicinal therapeutic practices do you have that are like, in a comfortable environment with a, special like set of, music and and a trained therapist to talk to with the substance. It's a really kind of like unique new thing. And I think that is really important to point out. Don't just think you can, take a pill or take a trip and it's going to result in all these things. Inevitably, I think it's a combination of those things that we have to have.
Agreed. Yeah, it's a whole ball of wax, guys, and that's why we have so many episodes here and on yours. And
That's right.
It's an endless pit, and it's going to be, I think, accelerating. Like, I don't know if you've seen all the hype from these upcoming conferences, but it's going to be a really interesting next few years in this space.
Totally. Yeah. I'm a little concerned about the influx of capital into the field. I mean, it's interesting because, of course, for years you think like if only somebody would just fund all the research and, get this stuff approved and whatever, which MAPS has been toiling away carefully doing. But as soon as like the capitalists get involved, we have that sort of like, possible level of like corruption and toxicity coming in. And not to say that anybody who's in this for the money is necessarily like, conflicted in that way. But I just think there are some inherent conflicts when you typically have, profit motive. So that's kind of a concern right now, is thinking about how like, a lot of for-profit companies are coming in, and in many cases, like, I mean, I think for-profit companies can operate more effectively than nonprofits in some ways. They can poach staff, they can, devote more resources to things. And essentially they're coming in and benefiting from like years of like passion put into this field by the people who really care and are, really having carefully considered motives and things in the nonprofit space. And the for-profit companies are coming in and saying like, okay, perfect. Like, I'm going to strike while the iron is hot. I'm going to just, funnel a bunch of like practically free money, which, we have right now in society, into this space and like see what happens. And it's like giving LSD to Charles Manson. It's like throwing money, throwing gasoline on a fire. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, I'm pretty. I don't know. I'm also hopeful because there's finally money, right? It's like the clinical trials will be done because they need to be done. There's so much work to do there, et cetera. And then on the other hand, I mean, like look at the marijuana movement. I mean, it's hilarious. Like when you go into one of these, like for me as a person who lives in a place where I can't go into a store and like to walk into a shop in California and see how many brands there are and like. How you get like the same product made by like X different manufacturers. I mean that should be good, right? That should be a good thing. Like,
yeah, the free market definitely has some positive powers. And competition is a good thing, but so is cooperation. And I think like in society we have a lot of experience competing. We don't have as much experience cooperating, and true like cooperation and collaboration I think is a really key thing. And when like for-profit companies come in, they know they're doing it to compete. They're not necessarily doing it to cooperate. So if we can somehow foster more cooperation, co-opetition, let's say, between the for-profit and nonprofit industries, and just across the board in this field, it's for the good of humanity. Like, why are we doing this? We're trying to like help society. We're trying to help ourselves have a more durable society. I mean, get well. We're on the cusp of falling apart. Like, I think it's kind of clear at this point, right? To almost anyone paying attention. Like, let's not let it fall apart. Let's work together. Put all the resources in, all the money. That's great. You can profit. That's great. But let's do it so that we can continue to have an enduring society, and human civilization as we know it.
Well, I love it. Speaking my language, and listeners know that. Awesome. All right. So I think we've got a wrap here, but let's do a little bit of a shout out. Where can people find your website and show?
So we're at entheogenshow.com. We're also on, I think, Twitter and Facebook at Entheogen Show as well. And we're getting ready to release. We have a couple episodes queued up, and we're going to start doing video as well. So we're getting ready to release a few. I don't think we're going to announce yet who we have, but we're working with a couple of get well-known guests in the field. So yeah, we're excited to be coming back, and we look forward to hearing any feedback about this show, about our show, and keep on doing the good work that you guys are doing over there, Joe. And thanks for having us on, man. This has been really great.
Thanks for being like the NPR of psychedelics.
Yes,
that's how I think
Joseph
of you guys.
Gross coming at you from
I need like the Leonard. I want the Leonard
Yeah.
Lopate like slow, jazz intro. It's the sax,
Someday I'll get there. My heart rate has to slow down first.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, thank you both, Kevin and Joe. It's been fun.
It's been a pleasure.
Can't wait to do more.